Hi, y'all. Welcome to another episode of Married to a Shrink. My name's Allie. I am the shrink part of Married to a Shrink. And alongside me is my husband, Michael. And we like to have in-depth conversations about all things relationships from a perspective of someone who is clinically in the field and has worked as a couples and sex therapist for many a year. And I like to have these conversations alongside you, babe. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank y'all. Michael, I'm Allie's husband and partner. I am not a therapist, so I come at these discussions from the average non-clinical perspective.
You're still using clinical words there. Well, good. So today we're talking about gender and what gender norms and what it is like to be in a partnership, a heterosexual partnership with a male and female and all of the dynamics that have to do with that. And so I want to kick us off with a conversation topic about how do you perceive our gender differences and the impact that gender has on our dynamic?
Well, I think in our time together as partners and as we have daughters and as they have gotten older and I've become more versed in gender norms, my views on gender has changed dramatically. I came into our partnership, I think, with a more traditional. I definitely came from a very traditional gender norm upbringing, and I think kind of coming out of the box with regards to relationships, that's what I was used to. Not that that's what I was necessarily looking for, but I think I migrated towards that just because that's what I had always seen and been around.
Well, elaborate on that a little bit more. When you say you come from upbringing of more gendered, normative.
Sure. So very traditional gender roles. My parents were. My father was the breadwinner. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for most of my childhood. She went back to work after my brother went to school. So it was very much, my dad would go to work, provide for our family financially. My mom was the one, or my grandmother who lived with us, was the one, getting us to and from school, to our events, doing the food shopping, doing the cooking, the cleaning, kind of when you see some of those stereotypical shows from families in the 80s, that was largely my household.
And so you came from that and then you shifted into our relationship, which is, how is that adjustment for you? And what do you see are the big differences in our relationship and the style of which we operate our gender norms?
Sure.
Yours?
So I would say I'm going to talk about our relationship, but I'm also going to kind of talk about like my relationships experiences in general.
Yeah.
So while that's the environment that I was raised in, for whatever reason, I've always been attracted, and I'm using an absolute there. I tended to matriculate towards strong women.
Yeah.
Thinking back to my first serious relationship in college, she was very much a feminist, wanted to be a provider, wanted to be successful in the corporate world. So that was definitely different from my upbringing, but that's just kind of been something it's been common throughout my relationships. Now with you as my partner, you are very much a feminist, and I am very proud of you for that. You're a wonderful role model for our daughters. We, in our home, I would like to think of us as equals. We both have equal say. We both contribute to our home financially. equally. There's things that you take more of a role on, and there's other things I take more of a role on. You're definitely more, because of your flexible schedule, you tend to be the one who is more often than not picking up or dropping off from logistics. I try to share in that as I can with my more rigid schedule. But I feel like I make it up for it in other ways that are a little bit less, from traditional gender norms. I think I contribute a fair amount to the preparing of our dinners and our meals, doing grocery shopping and cleaning. I think that's something we contribute as a household. So our relationship is very different than my parents' relationship.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think different than my parents' relationship, I think as well. My parents, I think, again, generationally, I think there's just, my mom didn't work up until, I finished elementary school, right? And so same type of dynamic. And so everyone has a joint bank account, has always had joint bank accounts. We do our finances very differently in terms of we just have 2 joint bank accounts. One is an automatic contribution to our travel funds, right? So that, because that was something that has always made me really uncomfortable when traveling with other relationships. It's like, okay, no, you get that. No, you get that. And it's just like that tit for tat, I feel like really undermines the connectivity and the enjoyment of the relationship, especially when you're traveling. And so I like how we equally contribute into one account, and that card is what we always use when we travel, like for gas or airfare or eating out, or we want to go get drinks, or we want to do something or do an activity. It all comes from that. We've equally contributed to that, because I get uncomfortable with the tit for tat. And then I wouldn't say I get uncomfortable, but I don't like the automatic assumption that because you are male, you are burdened with all the expenses associated with enjoyment of something together, right? And which leads to kind of the next dynamic that I think is unique for us. And again, we have styled like this because of what I have learned as a couples therapist and the research that is out there in terms of finances, right? And really being able to maintain autonomy, especially when you're in a heterosexual relationship where there's a lot of gender norms and a lot of societal expectation, right? And something else that we do a little bit differently is that our other joint account is just our bills, mortgage, and necessities. And then everything outside of that is all in our names, or in our individual names, right? And so because I feel strongly about not having to ask you to take myself out for lunch, or not having to buy, I love a good resale shop, and I don't want to have to ask to see, can I spend money on this? No, it's my money that I've earned and I've worked for. I know that our bills are being paid for, right? And because I'm contributing to that, and we do everything 50-50, splitsies. And then I know that I'm contributing to our travel. So whenever we do travel, because we love to travel, that's one of our joys, is being able to just operate from that one account, and then we do everything separate. We are the only couple I know of who does this.
Same here. I don't know of any other couples that do. I think it's really a great, I think some of it also stems from our past traumas and our past being wronged with regards to finances.
Yeah.
So I think that's played a role. But I think to other couples out there, I think it's really a wonderful solution when there's 2 working individuals in the partnership. It's wonderful, like you said, we're both contributing to our travel fund. Our bill account covers our expenses on a monthly basis, our mortgage, our insurances and
Things
things
that
of
have to do
that
with
sort.
raising kids, like all that kind of stuff.
And then the balance is in our own personal account. And if there's anything big, I think we would certainly talk with each other and at least get input from the other. I'm not turning around and purchasing a car without telling you.
No, but when you do, those are your funds.
Right.
Right? Like there doesn't, but to your point, we do. Like
Right.
if, I think we have always found that if we're spending over like a few $100s, even though it's our own money, we'll consult with the other. Like, do you think this is a good purchase for me? Do you
Right.
think that this will add value for me?
Right. And I don't think it's from a getting permission sense. It's
No.
just we want the other's input,
Absolutely.
to see, am I being wrong here, or is this just, am I caught up in the moment?
100%, because it's not permissive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it is your money. It is my money. We can do with what we want. However, to your point, that's part of the fun and the dynamic and the connecting part that you can really have with money, to be like, hey, I'm thinking of this. Do you think this will add value to me? Do you think this will really help me out in some way? Or do you think, to your point, I'm getting caught up in some sort of deal or moment and it's really not necessary? Because I know we have both helped each other in that capacity to make sure we're not making purchases that we would regret.
Right.
Right? And so, again, I talk to my couples about this when I would do premarital. I always suggest it. Some folks me up on it, I think, but some just it's too foreign for them to be able to set up this type of financial dynamic based on kind of that gendered role, because it is societally the expectation. I think it's shifted, but I still think it is still the norm for the male to have to be the predominant financer of the lifestyle and of the home. And I feel like stay-at-home fathers are still pretty taboo comparatively to stay-at-home mothers.
Sure. Absolutely.
And
And I think that trickles through just our society in general. I can tell you through the court system, there's definitely that stigma there with regards to mothers and fathers.
yeah, mothers are all maternal, and fathers their contribution is financially, right? Not emotionally, not outside of just making sure that kiddos have their basic needs and are loved, right?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But with that, I do think then there comes the societal pressures. I feel like we're as equal as I think we can be, but I still think that we get out of whack and out of sorts because, to your point, I think sometimes the lines of my job is more flexible than yours, but I think there's still, even in our dynamic, I think sometimes you're cognizant of it. I think other times you're not, that I am always the default. And I don't know if it's because I'm flexible or my role and my career is more flexible, or if it's because I'm the woman. And I think it's a combination, because I think, one, I am very maternal. And so I'm already thinking several steps ahead regarding items and things for the children that are in our home, right? And so I'm already thinking about, okay, well, who's going to pick up for that? Like, what's happening here? Is this something we need to do? All of that. But I also think there becomes a default. And because I am the woman, and because I maybe at times am the preferred parent, because I am the woman, because I am the mother, or is it because it is more flexible? Do you hear what I'm saying? I
hear
feel
what
like
you're
sometimes it's automatically assumed, well, we're not going to communicate on this because Allie will make sure it happens.
Sure. I'd like to think it's largely because of the flexibility factor. What really often comes to mind is appointments, right? I've come to the point now often, when I get a call from the doctor's office, like, hey, we need to reschedule this appointment or that appointment. Oftentimes I'll say, can you give Allie a call?
Yeah.
Because I'm just going to go and refer to Allie, and then I'm a middle person. So there's definitely an assumption that's made there, not because you're a female and that you're in the mom role, but it's because you have that flexibility in your, generally speaking, in your day to day.
Do you think it's a little bit because I'm the female or no?
No, I'd like to think not.
I feel like that is a very real statement in terms of I'd like to think not, but I would be curious if you did not in this moment, but later if you thought about it more, if you were like, oh, no, maybe it is a little bit because maybe less of the female, but more of the mother role, right? And like how mothers are often the default parent. And so it becomes particularly challenging when the default parent is also career minded and has a career. And I'm very passionate about my career.
No, absolutely you are.
And so it's that I think can be the challenge in terms of like where I wonder at times. And to your point, it may truly be because of the flexibility, but I do sometimes wonder if it is because the more traditional roles are what you were modeled, but also the traditional roles is what's really influenced upon us as a couple. And I feel, and a lot of couples, and I feel like we are unique in a lot of ways, and that makes us feel, I think, lonely at times because it's hard for us to sometimes relate.
Lonely with regards to other couples?
To other couples in terms of our dynamics and our gender.
For sure. I mean, you as you mentioned, are probably the most driven person I know from a career perspective. You're very driven. You can't stand to be just in that lane going on cruise.
I struggle with stagnation.
You
this
do.
This is a true statement.
So you'll look for a second job to put on top of that, on top of being a mother, on top of being a partner, starting another company. I mean, you're always looking at ways to branch out and use your creativity. And I think, that some of that is against gender norms.
Yeah.
I think your creativity, oftentimes is associated with the female, but your career drive, I think is unique in our relationship compared to a lot of our other couple friends.
Yeah, and do you feel like the fact that you are creative and you're really into the aesthetics and you really love design and things like that, do you think that goes against what is the gendered norm for male?
I think largely it does.
Because I think for when we talk to people, the fact that you have an opinion and a very detailed opinion whenever we are buying furniture or doing anything for our home or right, like you have very detailed opinions, which I think is also a little bit more outside of the gendered norm.
Sure. I think, thinking when we're talking to somebody for flooring or about a renovation, oftentimes the default is they'll look to you first, being the female, and it'll be like, hey, I've got an opinion here. This is how I'd like it to be done and what I think it should look like. I think initially with some of the people we've worked with, they've been surprised by that.
Yeah. And so moving on into some of the aspects of gender roles, how do you think the male and female brains and how we operate within our minds, within our chosen sexes, affects the way we communicate?
I think gender norms, you would say that women are more emotional. They're more expressive. I don't think it's uncommon. I don't think I'm abnormal from other males that tend to keep my emotions in, tend not to express myself. I think men typically are a little bit more competitive, which I think comes out in not only physical aspects, but in our relationships with trying to get our opinion heard and decided upon. Those are the ones that come to mind.
Well, I would add to that you were quick to just go into solution mode. And I think I have to pause you a number of times to make sure you're validating me and I feel heard before we move into solutions, if I even want you to move into solutions at all.
No, you're right. Yeah, I think again that's traditional role. The male, we want to solve problems, or I want to solve your problem. If you're encountering an issue, I want to resolve it. I want to make it better.
Yeah.
And to your point, a lot of times you just want to be acknowledged and be heard. You're not interested in the opinion or the solution in that moment. You just want to be acknowledged that this is here and this is why you're feeling that way.
Yeah, because most of the time I can solve my own problems, and I want to solve my own problems. But when I want your guidance, I always ask for it, right? Like, I need help with this. Can you please help me? And I don't have a problem asking for help. But again, I wonder if that's because I'm female. I don't know if you do struggle to ask for help, because I can't think of a time where you've asked me, like, oh, no, I take that back. You asked me to be involved with a lot of things, and I think that's less to do with our gender and more to do with sometimes a lack of confidence around something.
I think it's fair.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how else do you think that our gender, so we've already talked a little bit about communication, but what about conflict? How do you think us being male and female affects our conflict?
I mean, I don't know how much of this has to do with you being female and being a therapist. You're much more direct, but I don't know if that holds true.
I don't think that's a gender thing.
But I was going to say, I don't think that's because you're a female.
I think that's more because of my
Your
clinical
background.
training. Yeah.
So in terms of handling conflict, I don't know. I think about that discussion we had with your parents just a few weeks ago when you and your dad were talking about an incident, whether he was going to, encounter it head on or you're just going to sweep it under the rug. Mm-hmm. I think sweeping it under the rug is much more a male thing.
And I think that again is I think you fall into that. I think you have evolved as our partnership has evolved, and you've become, partnered with a therapist. You really, unfortunately, you don't have the ability not to obtain some skill sets along the way, mm-hmm. right? Because I would go crazy, and then we probably wouldn't have a marriage, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but I think you have improved as you've picked up skill sets, but you have struggled to, and I feel like you still struggle to communicate your emotions and to say, this is bothering me. I didn't like when you did X, Y, Z. Can we do something differently next time? Again, aligned to some of the communication conversation we had in previous episodes of this podcast. I still think that a lot of that, yes, some of it is trauma, and we have worked very hard not to be trauma bonded, right? And so Google that. I won't go into all of that right now for our listeners, but a trauma bond can be really detrimental to a relationship, right? Is when you come together as partners with trauma, and your trauma feeds off of each other, right? And where you can only find solidity in relation to the trauma within partnership. And we don't have a trauma bond.
Is that like the trope in movies where there's a guy and a girl and there's like a stressful moment and then all of a sudden they're like brought together by that? Is that like a
Yeah,
trauma
that's
bond?
an example of a trauma bond. Or it's like two people who are abused by their family of origins, and so they partner, but they don't have any actual skills, and they're not healed for their own trauma, and so they utilize behaviors like manipulation and coercion and other things to keep the other person with them or to stay and to navigate a relationship, but they're unable to healthily. That's the right word, right? Healthily is a word. That sounded strange off my tongue. They're unable to do so in a healthy way. Is that better? They're able to do so they're not able to do so in a healthy way because they're bonded because of the trauma that they've experienced.
So yes, we
right?
don't have that.
We don't have that.
Yeah.
But all that to say, we both have histories of trauma, like majority of human beings in this world, and our trauma is different. But I sometimes don't know if your inability to be expressive and to communicate, because sometimes you'll struggle just to do basic communication, if it's because of a trauma trigger, if it's because you are male and it is what you feel like is expected of you, it's what was modeled for you not to be as communicative, or if it's because you're just not at a capacity standpoint to be able to deliver on those skills. Does that make sense?
Sure. I think it's probably a combination of all those factors. Fear, confidence, being male, being what's modeled. I think in those moments, it's a little bit of all of it, depending on the instance.
And so, fair. And so, where has there been conflict around the fact that we are both, we're not both male, female, that one of us is male and one of us is female?
You tend to call out, you'll call out when you feel like something is playing against those gender norms. You oftentimes will call it out. I can't think of any specific instance. I just can think here in general terms. You'll talk about how, and I do appreciate how you model being a strong woman to our children. I think that is a wonderful thing for them to see, because I'd love for them to be strong women themselves. I don't want them in, if I had a choice in the matter, I'd rather them not be in traditional gender norm relationship, unless that's what they truly wanted. But at times I know you've said, hey, would you want our girls to be in my shoes in this moment? The only thing I know that we had a lot of conversation about, in the last year, how upset you were with regards to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Yeah. And I on your side, but you really took that hard.
Yeah, I did. Because to your point, I feel like you are an ally to women and to the gender of woman. But I think again, I know you're rolling your eyes when I say this, but as a cisgender white male, insert eye roll here, you hold the power in this country, right? And so when Roe versus Wade and the overturning of that was so impactful for me, and I had to grieve that, not because I am pro or anti-abortion, but because women's rights were taken away, and in a way of men's were not. Men's rights were not affected, but women's rights were. And women in this country are being told what they can and can't do with their bodies. But men are not being told what they can or cannot do in their bodies. And that's where I had a really hard time with the inequitability of it, right? You know, in most societies, so yes, the United States, but in most societies, yeah, the cisgender white male is the top of the pyramid, you know, top of the food chain, so to speak, and they are the ones with the power. And so I feel like I have had to educate you in our relationship. As someone with the power, you need to utilize your voice and that power to help the disenfranchised and to help those who don't have the same equitability. It will probably never be, right? Because of a lot of dynamics, there will probably no one will ever be probably on the same page. But I feel like that was a struggle, I think, when we first partnered, and coming from kind of, yes, you have been partnered with strong women, but I think that you had not really seen from a full perspective the amount of power that you hold as a cisgender white male and what you need to be doing with that power, right? I know there's been times when I've been upset with you when you haven't been thoughtful about how you would vote around something, where I was like, no, but this person supports a law or an initiative that hurts women. And as a father to daughters, you need to be thoughtful of that, because people listen to white men. And so it's like, yeah, you need to be a voice to that, right? And I think that's where you've had a lot of growth, is as a real ally in your role, and kind of recognizing that you do hold the power. But I think you have also really struggled with that, because I know that we have gotten in some, I would say, heated conversations surrounding when I call out, yeah, but love, you're a cisgender white male. You're the tippy top.
I
And
know,
you're
I hate
just
when
like,
you throw that in my face.
well, but that's what and again, that diction you just used, I'm going to counter, that's a defense right there. The fact that you're taking it as I'm throwing it in your face, it's not a fair characterization, because that's not what I'm doing. It's not what I'm trying to do anyway. What I'm trying to do is say, hey, you've got the power, be an ally to me and our daughters. But to your point, you take it as throwing it into your face. And that's where I get upset.
Mm-hmm.
So do you care to rephrase, or are you going to stick with you? I throw it in your face?
No, it's either the white cisgender male or the, coming from a place of privilege. Oftentimes in our conversation.
But we do come up from a place of privilege. And the fact that you can't recognize that.
I can recognize it.
But can you?
I can recognize it.
But then how come you get defensive about it? To your point, when I said cisgender white male, you're like, you throw it in my face. That's a defense. Why does that?
I'd like to think that it can be a component of it in a discussion, but for it to be like the deciding factor in a heated conversation, like, you're a cisgender white male, like that's the concluding factor.
But I don't think that's ever been the case. When I bring up that, or privilege, right? Because we are very privileged, and I feel like you're unable to acknowledge it. And when you're unable to acknowledge it, how can you truly understand and be an ally to it if you can't acknowledge or see it?
I can acknowledge it and I can see it. I don't think I usually have a problem with that.
But you don't say, when I say, but babe, I need you to see it from a perspective of someone without as much power as you. Like, you have to, again, think about the fact that you are the top of the pyramid, and can you put that aside in terms of knowing that, like, because of that, you may not be seeing things from the perspective of someone who is disenfranchised or who is negatively affected by their gender or their race or something else, right? And I think instead of being like, yeah, I can recognize that I do hold the power, and so I need to be sensitive to those who don't, you get defensive about it.
I think sometimes I have a hard time not acknowledging, but seeing myself as the top of the pyramid.
But who's above you? Silence ensues. Right?
I don't know. I feel
And
like
this is where Michael gets really uncomfortable.
I mean, I would say there's people that come from wealthier families. There are people.
Well, no, there's always someone better or worse off. I'm just talking about, and we can get off this topic. All I'm trying to just point out is that as a whole, structurally, the cisgender white male is the top of the food chain in these United States. And all I am saying is that not all the time does that need to be acknowledged when you're talking about gender discrepancies and gender roles, but sometimes it does. And in the sometimes it does need to be acknowledged, you really struggle to acknowledge it.
Okay, I'll be a little more mindful. I'll try to be more mindful of it.
Yeah. And we'll talk about privilege another time. I won't soak up that, because that is a whole other dynamic. Because as a highly sensitive person and empath, I am very, to a fault, I think, to a place that can be destructive for me, aware of my privilege. And that I don't think is related to gender roles, so I'll leave it there.
Sure.
But it is part of that type of dynamic, and you only brought it up because you brought it up about privilege when you were tying in some of those. So, in kind of as we move towards wrapping up a little bit, what would you say has been the biggest learning experience that you have had when it comes to being male, married to a female, raising daughters? When it comes to gender?
I think you mentioned a short bit ago. While I've shared a lot of the views, I think I've become more of an ally. I think that was the diction you used, was the term ally. I think it's important, for our daughters to see a strong woman role. You wear that hat. You are a strong woman, and you a great contributor to our home, financially and in all other ways. Some of those are traditional women hats and others are not. I think we, as a couple, we kind of cross some of those gender norms. Both of us do. And I think that's a good thing for our girls to see and other children in our home to see.
Well, it's just, I'm glad you added the caveat for other children in our home, because I think equally as important is to model for young men how to be an ally, right? And not to be sucked into kind of those dynamics that may not serve you. And I am by no means shaming or saying traditional gender roles are inappropriate or that they don't serve people or that they shouldn't exist. A number of people that I know and people that I work with operate under traditional roles, and they are very fulfilled and they have lovely partnerships, right? But that's not what I want.
That's not what I want
And that's
either.
not what you want either. And so because that's not what we want as individuals, then it's not what we have created in our marriage. But I do think it's equally as important for boys and young men to see what it's like to have equitability in relationships. And because they can decide, you know what? I think I may want to be a stay-at-home dad, right? And I don't want to be highly career driven, or right, like that there's other options and that allow you to be involved as a family man or as a partner in the event that you don't want to just be the quote unquote breadwinner, right? And I think that people knowing that they have options is the most important thing, so they can decide what works for them. Because our dynamic's not going to work for everyone. Just like a traditional dynamic would not work for us. But there's nothing wrong with any of these dynamics. The
Sure.
only dynamic that's inappropriate is abuse and, confines surrounding that. And I say inappropriate, really, I'm meaning not healthy, because your partnership should exist around the concept that you're able to thrive as an individual so that you can contribute to the things you need to contribute to, right? And I think we've talked a number of times about the difference between partnership and marriage.
We have.
And what have we kind of...
We want to have a partnership. I mean, it is a marriage, but we want it to be a partnership.
Yeah. And a lot of folks choose marriage. Some people choose partnership. We have chosen to do both, right? And with that, kind of, when we had decided to get married, because I don't know if we have already said this, but it was you who wanted to get married.
It was more me that was pushing it. Yeah.
I was okay being a long-term partnership, and which is fine. And but because of my indifference, I was like, oh, we can do this. But then I was not going to change my name. My name is hyphenated. And we had talked about you potentially changing yours to a hyphenated, but you are a third. And so, but I didn't know if that was really the reason, or if there was some discomfort around that equitability in the last name, the hyphenated last name.
I think the third was the biggest thing, was certainly the biggest factor. I'd be lying if I would say that there wasn't some discomfort about the guy changing his last name. But largely it was, mass majority was because I'm a third.
Yeah. And maybe I should have pushed that more at the time. I think that would have been a really significant thing for me had you chosen to hyphenate, like I chose to hyphenate. But I also respect that you are the third line of the same name. And so I respect that. But I think that is, to your point, I'm glad you acknowledged it, that would have been really outside the box for you. And so, because we kind of teeter between this line of like, we're not completely unorthodox because you're not as unorthodox as I am, I feel like. And where I tend to always go off the beaten path, you go off the beaten path if you're with me.
I think there's some truth to that. I think I go off the beaten path on my own.
When it comes to relationship dynamics and gender roles?
I don't know about the whole relationship dynamics, but maybe not with regards to relationship dynamics.
Or gender roles, because that's what
Yeah,
I'm
gender
specifically
roles.
talking about here.
I would say gender roles.
You don't go off the beaten path.
No,
for
I
gender roles.
do. Not with relationship, but with regards to gender roles. Sometimes I I go off the beaten path or do things my own way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you don't see a lot of male hyphenated names. All I'm saying is it would have been cool had we kind of
And I'm totally supported, and I was proud of you hyphenate. I didn't push back on that.
Well, no, you didn't push back, because how are you going to push back?
Well, it wasn't-
What are you going to say? No, you're going to take my name?
Fair.
You will take my name. You will marry me, and you will take my name. So yeah, no, I hear that. I'm just saying we could have taken it even further had you let us. Well, any final thoughts or any advice to folks listening in regards to kind of navigating the differences between the male and female gender when it comes to communication or conflict, or
I think it's important to try to understand what those differences are in your relationship, in your partnership. To anybody that's looking at coupling or has a lot of discussions with their partner and has issues with finances, I think you may want to strongly consider kind of how we handle our finances. I think we never had those problems, and I think a lot of it is because we handle finances the way we do.
We don't fight about money ever. Yeah.
So I think that's a big takeaway, and that follows kind of the gender norm, because that's, I think, a little different.
Yeah. Well, with that, next week is, ready? Sex. Let's talk about sex, baby. So get ready for that. Michael is probably going to sweat shit through his shirt, be highly uncomfortable, maybe use some words that he doesn't voice very often as we kind of get into.
I may have to have a bottle of whiskey right
I
now.
know, right? Just sip it. And we're going to talk about how sex shifts from beginning of relationship, dating, and all of that through when you are more concrete and partnered, kind of differences in ideologies around sex, because we both have different ideologies around sex. Sex is a loaded topic. We'll see if we have to make it 2 episodes, but we'll see as far as we can get next time. So with that, thanks for being here. I know these are sometimes fun, sometimes uncomfortable, and I appreciate you being willing to be married to a shrink and
I
be
love
able
it.
to have these conversations.
Wouldn't change it for the world.
Oh, thanks, babe. I appreciate you. Until next time.
I love you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.